All right, catching up to five listeners. It's the holiday season, and next week is Christmas Day. Jackie, happy holidays. Diana, happy holidays, and happy holidays to our audience, right?
Oh my gosh, happy holidays. It's been an amazing year. I cannot believe it's Christmas already. Bill's got on his hat. I got on my red. We've got Diana joining us. So I want to say happy holidays to our Catching Up to Five family. You've made it a very special year.
Yes, from our hearts to yours and to yours and yours. Happy holidays.
Okay, well, today, guys, we have a special treat for you. And before Cody Garrett was a financial planner extraordinaire, he was, or still is, a musician at heart. And he has blessed us with a compilation of Christmas melodies. Right, Jackie?
Yeah, this is such a lovely thing that he puts together every single year. Original piano playing by Cody Garrett, just a mashup of all of your favorite holiday songs. And we asked him if we could use it to the end of the show. So be sure to stay tuned to the end. It's very soothing and festive holiday music that you are just going to love.
And if the market's going down, just put it on repeat. Like today.
That's right. Yes, happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas.
So giving every dollar a job and a use by date, you have to say, when do I expect to use this money, right? And what purpose does this money have in terms of what am I purchasing? Or if it's a gift, right? When am I going to give the gift? And what type of charity do I want to give it to in the future? So returns on investments, I actually break it into 3 sections, which is from 0 to 3 years. So any money you plan to spend within the next 3 years, I think it's perfectly fine to keep that money in high yield savings, a money market fund, right? Treasury bills or treasury notes. As people become more educated, they actually feel more comfortable taking a risk. Again, assuming that they give every dollar a job and a use by date. What I mean by conservatively by working, and then the flip side, right, being too aggressive moving into retirement, it's the idea of catching up to FI. I think sometimes we assume the only way I can catch up is by taking risk and like go big or go broke, go big or go home, right? So I find that, again, giving every dollar a use by date, I constantly ask myself and ask others saying, how much money do you plan to take out of your portfolio over the next 7 years?
I met a couple in their 80s who travel the country judging barbecue contests. They've been to 41 states. They just got back from Fargo. And in your slow-go or no-go years, you may not be able to do this. You got to focus on quality of life longevity, not just actuarial longevity. You want to close that gap between the quality of your life and your demise. You don't want to have a glide path that is really long to your death, that is dysfunctional. You can't just sit on the couch and watch Netflix for 10 years in your retirement. You want to maximize the quality of your life. Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. We're fresh off the Bogleheads Conference. It was fantastic. Jackie and I were there. We met a lot of heroes, saw a lot of friends, made new friends. Jackie, what was your feeling about the Bogleheads Conference?
Oh, it was wonderful. Some of the smartest people I know. And the fun fact this year was that they had a big chunk of it to have a fire focus. They even had a fire panel that I was on with some giants, Paula Pant, Big Earn, Doc G. It was awesome. So I loved being on that panel, and to see a fire panel at the Bogleheads Conference was something I never would have expected. But yeah, we got to catch up with a lot of people that were on the podcast. We got some new people that'll be coming on the podcast. So we had a great time, and we found out where it's going to be next year, right?
Yeah, it's going to be either in San Antonio or Austin, and we hope to see some of you there next year. It's been very popular. We've seen parents and sons and daughters that brought parents. So it's a multi-generational conference, not just for these older bogleheads.
Right. I saw a lot of young people, especially in that fire panel that we did, a lot of younger people. And we're just big around here on community. And a lot of people love the in-person stuff. That's definitely one of the in-person events that we recommend.
Okay, and our weekly shout out is for the Bogleheads on Investing podcast with host Rick Ferry. He just did a recent show with Christine Benz on her book, and we're going to have her back on to talk about her book. Now, we do have a charity shout out too, and of course, we're going to recommend the John C. Bogle Center for Financial Literacy at boglecenter.net. You'll be hearing this later, but the recovery will be going on for months, if not years. We want to shout out to American National Red Cross Triangle region so that you can help out with the recovery for those devastated people and property that are in Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. I did put a shout out on the Facebook community, so look at that. There's some recommended charities, but I donated to the Red Cross on both the Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee side. So if you get a chance, donate your appreciated shares or use your donor advised fund to help people out. And let's all work together to help our community and those of us that are actually in Western North Carolina, of which there were a few, recover from this disaster. We have a weekly review that we want to share with you, and we are so proud that people enjoy this show. And somebody said, CUtFI is a really great podcast and a really important niche for this audience. So many people feel like they're behind, but they present stories and information to help people get started wherever they're at. But they're realistic about what it takes to build your retirement. I've really enjoyed the guests they've had on the show. And today, Jackie, we have Cody Garrett. He's back on the show in the house.
Yes. Hey, Cody, how you doing?
Doing so well. Glad to be back. It's so funny that you called me back after a Twitter post of all things, an X post after all this time.
Yeah, well, let's give a proper introduction, even though you have been on the show before. So Cody Garrett, CFP, is an advice-only financial planner that is passionate about helping do-it-yourself investors on the path to financial independence and through early retirement. As the owner of the Measure Twice brand, he specializes in comprehensive financial plan development and personalized education to help families implement their own well-informed decision. Passionate about education, Cody teaches DIY investors how to create their own financial plans with his comprehensive video course that we highly recommend, and templates at measuretwicemoney.com. We'll drop that in show notes. His educational insights have been featured by Barron's, Forbes, Fox Business, CNBC, Morning Brew, Morning Insider, and Market Watch. A whole lot more, but we'll stop there. You can also hear him on the Catching Up to 5 podcast, episode 35, and watch him meet with real financial planning clients on the Measure Twice Money YouTube channel. So Cody, I am most excited about what you are doing with that YouTube channel. It is so cool to see behind the scenes how a financial planning meeting should go. And you are recording all of this. You got them to agree. So tell me how that's going and why you even started doing that.
So that phrase you said, right, behind the scenes, there's been this thing just traditionally within the financial services industry to kind of keep a barrier between consumers and advisors, where maybe there's some proprietary information going on behind the scenes, or it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, like there's somebody pulling these levers behind the scenes, but you don't quite know what they're doing behind the scenes. So I wanted to really break down this barrier of a lack of transparency within the industry, but also two sides. I want new and aspiring financial advisors, financial planners to know it can be done differently than it's been done in the past. Focus on truly comprehensive financial planning, not just on the quantitative side, not just, of course, understanding the numbers and the taxes and the insurance and the investments, but also understanding the family's unique values and desired outcomes, right? So going into the qualitative, the deeper conversations, the why, right? We teach kind of like what to do and how to do it, but we really need to identify that why. I know we talk about this a lot on the show about that financial plan. I even have a trademark, keep finance personal. By the way, that's kind of maybe an Austin quote there, right? Keep Austin weird and keep finance personal. So I really wanted to show advisors that it could be done differently, but I also wanted to show, this is, I'm most passionate, I want to change the public perception of financial planning from a consumer level, just because there aren't many examples of what it actually looks and feels like to be a client on the other side of the table. So rather than hiring an advisor and hoping that you get a good experience, I want to provide at least an example experience of what it might look like or what you want to expect when working with somebody one-on-one.
Yeah. And I think, if anything, you have raised the bar on what financial planning should look like when you are working with your advisor.
Yeah, you also have a course that you're giving a discount to our audience for. Tell us about what that is, and then that they can get it at a discount.
Yeah, so going along with the financial planning on YouTube, I'm actually no longer accepting new financial planning clients. So even if you want to work with me after this conversation, I won't be taking on new clients. So with that said, since I can't serve everybody one-on-one that I'd love to, I decided to package my entire financial planning process, including all of my templates, tools, calculators, effectively showing you, again, right, breaking down the barrier, showing you behind the scenes exactly what I do to create a comprehensive financial plan. So I've created a 5-hour video course with 38 video lessons that are manageable. And again, all these lessons go pretty deep, but at the same time, each lesson is less than 10 minutes long. So you can definitely just take it one at a time. You eat the elephant one bite at a time. And yeah, so I provide a discount to the Catching Up to FI listeners for $100 off that course. So I'm sure they'll share that in the show notes. But if you want to ask more questions about that, measuretwicemoney.com has all of the example templates and what to expect when going through that course.
Well, look what you do for the individual investor. But the individual investor, the DIYer, a lot of our audience are trying to do that. They make tons of mistakes. And I've made most of them. You've got a list of 24, and we'll see if we get through all of them. But there are some we highlight that are particularly appropriate for our late starter audience. You wrote an article on this, and we'll link in the show notes to that article. Actually, you posted it to our community today. So look back in the post for the 24 DIYer investor mistakes, and you'll see already a lot of comments and suggestions there. And it's a very popular post. Let's bring it to life, however, on the show. Jackie, where do we start?
Yeah, well, Cody, I wanted to ask you, what were like 2 or 3 of the biggest ones, or ones that people raised their hand and said, oh, that is me. I have made that mistake.
I think the biggest one, actually related to another post I made, was I think a lot of investors, they don't realize they actually have a lot of cash sitting within their investment accounts. Just a quick thing here. Again, it's kind of fascinating, this idea of money market funds. Whenever you hold a money market fund, which is effectively, you would call it a cash equivalent. It's similar to a treasury bill or just like cash in your account. If it's held in a money market fund, it actually has 5 letters. The ticker of the money market fund is 5 letters ending with an X. And guess what? Most of your mutual funds, maybe your stocks and bond funds that you own, if you own mutual fund versions, they're 5 letters with an X, right? So VTSAX, right? But you see that in Fidelity, for example, your money market fund will most likely be SPAXX. So I just want to let everybody know that you might accidentally own cash in your account without realizing that it's actually kind of earmarked in that fund. So it might look like the rest of your invested money, but just keep track of that cash that might be building up on the sidelines. Just a quick notice there is, if you're looking through your tickers, like if you're looking at all your holdings in your account, if you see anything that's 5 letters long and ends in 2 X's, that actually means it's a money market fund, which is actually like holding cash in your account. So I've worked with some of the brightest DIY investors I've ever met. And by the way, these 24 mistakes, I've never met a DIY investor that didn't at least have maybe 5 of the 24 going on simultaneously. So that's just one example of something that's a common mistake, that once you look at your accounts, like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that I had $10,000 in cash sitting in my Roth IRA for the last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, what percentage of your portfolio do you recommend, or over what would potentially be a mistake where you see a lot of cash drag?
So I have a concept that I use called give every dollar a job and a use by date. And use by date kind of coming from, you go to the grocery store, the produce you have to eat within a week, right? You might be able to buy bagged rice that you can hold on to for a long time. So giving every dollar a job and a use by date, you have to say, when do I expect to use this money? Right? And what purpose does this money have in terms of what am I purchasing? Or if it's a gift, right? When am I going to give the gift? And what type of charity do I want to give it to in the future? So returns on investments, I actually break it into 3 sections, which is from 0 to 3 years. So any money you plan to spend within the next 3 years, I think it's perfectly fine to keep that money in high yield savings, a money market fund, treasury bills, or treasury notes. From 4 to 10, that's where it gets maybe a little bit more creative. That's where you can introduce intermediate bonds. Also, maybe some balanced portfolios, like kind of you hear about the traditional 60-40 portfolio between stocks and bonds. But then the money that I don't plan to spend within the next 11 plus years, historically, over an 11 plus year period, the S&P 500, the US stock market index, has actually historically, we can't necessarily rely on historical results for the future, but historically, over the last 100 years, the S&P 500 has not lost money over an 11 plus year period in total return. So I feel comfortable, again, telling the people I advise, and certainly this is not personalized advice for any of your audience, but I feel like 0 to 3 years, cash is fine. 4 to 10, maybe a balanced portfolio and introducing some other bonds. And then 11 plus, that's where I put my stocks, and I'm pretty aggressive with that time horizon.
Well, I've heard that more than 5 to 10% cash allocation will hurt your returns. Is that true?
Right. Yeah. Ultimately, they call that a cash drag. With that said, I don't focus on returns with short-term money. When we talk about money we're going to plan to spend within the next 3 years, we have an objective, a prioritized objective of stability and liquidity. So I don't want to put my money that I plan to spend within the next 3 years in something that could be down significantly over a 3-year period. I actually have a chart that I can share with the audience. We can put this in the show note that actually shows historically how long would you need to be invested in stocks to historically guarantee not lose money. Because we talk about the difference between gambling, right, and investing, and it really comes down to how long do you plan to invest. I would not invest any money I plan to spend within the next 3 years in the stock market, not just based on risk tolerance, how I feel about risk, but risk capacity. Historically, I wouldn't have wanted to take on that level of risk for such a short period of time.
Yeah, so we'll go through a few that we see a lot. And Bill, I know I'm guilty of many of these, and so are you. So we'll point our fingers at ourselves. So going down the list, so you got 1 through 24. So number 1 at the top was that they own too many accounts, including old and expensive workplace retirement accounts, health savings accounts, and checking, savings, and brokerage accounts without a clear purpose.
Yeah, what I find in financial planning is people are looking for clarity and confidence. And I find that with the clarity and confidence, especially moving into retirement, actually comes from saying, hey, how can we fit all of our accounts onto one page? I've worked with clients who have not only 20, 30 different accounts, maybe old 401ks, old 403bs. They've got a taxable brokerage account with every main custodian, Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard. Some that they're like, I think I have an app that has some money in it on my phone. I don't really know. So the first thing we do is not necessarily consolidate, because you have to be very careful about consolidating and moving money around. But overall, I love, especially moving into retirement, I think that every family can have fewer than 10 accounts. What I mean by that is you have your checking and your savings. Let's assume a married couple in this example, which has typically more. Checking, savings, taxable brokerage. Each spouse probably has a traditional IRA. Each spouse has maybe a Roth IRA and then maybe an HSA. What happens, though, is I work with people who want to retire within the next few years, and they have 2 additional 401ks from old employers that they may or may not have kept there on purpose. They left employers and said, oh, I think my old 401k is probably fine. But what happens is over time, it actually becomes, they have all these logins, right? It's complex. They have all these different logins. They kind of forget where their money is possibly. This is the biggest risk. I think I've heard this from maybe even other members on your podcast. One of the risks here is that what happens if that person passes away? What happens to the surviving spouse when they're left not only with the emotional burden of losing their spouse, but now they're trying to put all the pieces together and say, okay, my spouse just died and I have no idea where all their money is. And it's spread across 3, 4 different custodians. So even before you retire, like try to at least understand where your money is and try to find ways to consolidate if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I was never really guilty of this, but I have quasi 3 custodians. These are not recommendations, but I use Chase for my business and joint checking and credit cards. I use that for everything there. And I don't have too many credit cards, just a business for each my wife and myself, and then a joint. So that's where we hold our banking. And we don't hold much money there because the interest on this money is so low, like 0.01%. Then we have Ally for our sinking funds, our emergency fund. That's where that all is. And then I just consolidate, because I had a couple of custodians. I consolidated to Fidelity because Vanguard sold its solo 401k business to a census, and that pissed me off, quite frankly. And I was going to have too many custodians between a census, Vanguard, and Fidelity. So I moved everything to Fidelity, and I invested all my similar assets in ETFs with Fidelity. So not that I'm recommending this, but I feel much more comfortable that 3 logins takes care of this. And eventually, when I go to retirement, I'll leave my credit cards with Chase and move banking over to Fidelity too. So there's really essentially 2 accounts, and all my cash flow flows through Fidelity and Ally, and I could potentially move Ally over there and have everything at Fidelity.
Yeah, I'm surprised Bill didn't out me because he knows I have a ton of accounts. And so I'm guilty and I'm still guilty of it. I haven't worked it out yet. However, my reason, and I feel like a lot of do-it-yourselfers may have this, when I left my job when I retired back in 2019, I had a pretty large 401k. So I was sort of chasing bonuses where I would make more by opening up multiple accounts with multiple custodians than just one. So I still have some of those. And another little reason I was doing that was I'm a financial educator and I wanted to experience the customer service, but I'm sure I have well over 20 different providers. And I know I don't want to leave that to my daughter, like you were mentioning, Cody. So I have some work to do. So already I'm super guilty on the first one. So you're so right. I know it's plenty others. So Bill, what's the next one here?
Well, number two, and this is pertinent to our older late starters, is they start Roth conversions too early. Tell us about that, Cody.
Yeah, I think Roth conversions, it's funny how over time certain financial topics become very popular. I know a few years ago, it was all about the Series I bonds, and everybody was like, how can I get 9% risk-free on my cash? And NFTs were a big deal. Every 6 months, crypto becomes a big deal again, it seems. But in terms of Roth conversions, there is a lot of fear-driven media around Roth. Not Roth conversions, but this idea that someday there's going to be this massive, what they call the retirement tax bomb. If you aren't thoughtful about where your money is and how your money is going to be distributed to you in retirement, including with those required minimum distributions starting in your 70s. A lot of people are really fearing not just future taxes based on those distributions, but also they're worried about the sunset of Tax Cuts Jobs Act in terms of the standard deductions changing and the higher tax brackets. So this is really happening. People, they're actually working in their highest earning years. They're a few years away from retirement, and they're hearing all this fear-based media around, you need to put as much money into Roth as possible because otherwise taxes are going to blow up your retirement. And what I find is that I actually have a saying that Roth is for everyone, but not at the same time. So what I mean by that is it can make sense for everybody to have Roth, but it might make sense for somebody to not have any Roth until after they retire, right? So I'm working with people sometimes, they just retired at 60. They're like, I don't have any Roth money. What do I do? I'm like, guess what? We actually have 10 years to really control your sources of taxable income. So we actually have a great opportunity, kind of, they call it the gap years between retiring and when those, not just RMDs begin, but other sources of taxable income, such as Social Security, the portion that's taxable, also maybe future pension income from private and public pensions. So I just find that Roth conversions might be for everybody, but not necessarily just right now. It might make the most sense, actually, even tax optimized wise, to wait. So typically Roth conversions, just generally, it makes the most sense to contribute to and convert to Roth in your lower income years, whether that's a year you're taking a sabbatical, maybe you just retired and you're in your first year without significant income. There are so many variables involved, but I'll just say that, like, just again, my brand, measure twice before cutting once on Roth conversions, because it's almost like the more excited you get about a strategy such as Roth conversions, the more time you should spend thinking about the optimization and implementation of it. So the more excited you are, the more scared, the more emotion you feel around a strategy, the more time you should sit back and go, wait a minute, is this the right time? Just because it's the right strategy doesn't mean it's the right time.
So Cody, I notice a lot of people now, let's say if they're in their 40s and their 50s, the Roth IRA or Roth 401k has been around a lot longer during your working lifetime. So do you see it might even be a lesser need because let's say the baby boomers that are retiring now, a Roth wasn't around the entire time and they may not have anything in Roth, but I'm seeing a lot of people that do have a portion already in Roth and it might not be such a imbalance like it is for maybe our prior generation.
I think it's important to get a Roth started. And by the way, you might have heard about this idea of backdoor Roth IRA. So some people say I make too much to contribute to a Roth. First of all, a Roth 401k or Roth 403b has no income limits. So just putting $1 into a Roth account gets your 5-year clock started in terms of future earnings, tax-free earnings. But yeah, I just think that what's nice is the baby boomers now retiring without any Roth. Thankfully, they still have an opportunity to catch up with their Roth, by the way, but filling up that Roth with in the standard deduction and the smaller marginal tax brackets, the 10%, the 12% brackets. So if you're getting excited about a Roth conversion, make sure you learn more about how they work and when's the right time to do those conversions, whether working with a professional one-on-one or just learning more on your own.
Yeah, people talk about doing it in the fourth quarter. So what your income has been that year. And I think Mark Troutman recommends that as well. And it's part of your tax planning. I mean, do you absolutely have to do these? What if you're working till 63, 65 and your window is potentially short?
Yeah, so in that case, I have seen examples where it does make sense to contribute to Roth in your highest earning years, which sounds like the opposite of what I just said. But I think that if you're in a place where you're going to be maybe working more toward traditional retirement ages, 65, maybe working till 70, and then once you retire, you're immediately going to get these pensions that hit you into the 22, 24% brackets, maybe you don't really have a great opportunity. In that case, you might look at kind of hedging, maybe putting a percentage, maybe putting some in Roth. Usually, even if you contribute to a Roth 401k or 403b, the employer, at least traditionally, has put their matching portion or their non-elective contribution into the pre-tax side. So some people just say, hey, I'm not really sure if my tax bracket in the future for this income will be higher or lower, but I'm going to just go ahead and put a little in the both sides. So I would say for most people I work with, it only makes sense to choose one side each year. But I would say if somebody like that who's going to be working more traditionally and continue working, receive pension income, have real estate income, it might make sense to just kind of spread it across if you're not going to work with a financial planner one-on-one.
Jackie, let's pause for a minute. And before we continue, let's share some words about one of this week's sponsors, Delete Me.
Yeah, the latest report from the Federal Trade Commission showed that in 2023, $10 billion was lost to consumer fraud, and $2.7 billion of that was lost to imposter scams.
Yeah, they've tried to scam me. They've scammed my mother. This is a real problem. So what do you do about it? Well, first off, just learning more about the tactics these scammers use can help us know what to look out for. But in a big way, I try to keep our family protected is to make sure that all of our personal information is removed from as many data broker websites as possible so that we're less enticing of a target.
Yeah, you'd be shocked at how many sites out there are sharing your address, phone number, birthday, email, and a lot more. But fortunately, you can get these data brokers to remove your information. But unfortunately, the process takes hours and hours to do it by yourself.
I know, because I tried to contact them, and only after spending 10 hours did I give up and start using Delete Me, our sponsor today. So take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners, just go to joindeleteme.com/catching up. That's joindeleteme.com/catching up. You'll find the link in our show notes.
So what about this one, Cody? This comes up a lot, and this is number 4 on the list, but they falsely assume you don't need estate documents unless you have kids. Don't forget about powers of attorney, going beyond the will. And Bill, I do remember we had a great speaker on estate planning at the Bogleheads Conference. I think her name was Jenny, and we probably need to have an episode on that. But talk to us a little bit about that, Cody.
Yeah, so I simply say that when you think about estate documents, the problem is most people think about a will, and they're primarily thinking about who gets what. A lot of people think estate planning is when I die, who gets my stuff, right? And I say estate planning isn't just who gets what, but who does what. So I think it's actually more important to determine who does what. And that means who would act as agent for power of attorney, that durable power of attorney for financial purposes, also your medical power of attorney, also your executor. Who do you want to be in control of distributing your estate when you pass away? Who do you want to be in control of maybe filing your final tax returns, making sure that stuff's done correctly, reimbursing all your HSA distributions that you forgot to do while you were alive? There are really important people to choose in terms of agents for power of attorney, executors, yes, the people who get your stuff, like the bequest of property as they talk about, but also one reason people don't think you need estate documents until you have kids is because they're thinking about who takes care of the kids if I pass away. So that guardianship provision is typically, people think about if something were to happen to both of us, what would happen to our kids, for example? That's guardianship. So I just say, I think everybody needs estate documents, but it's just that for some people, it'll be more simple and others will be more complex. But I would say if you don't have any estate documents in place, go ahead and get those set up. Also, separately, the will is actually more of like a catch-all. They call it the residual, like what's left. So your beneficiary designations and your account titling actually are prioritized above what's written in your will. So again, I would say get your beneficiary designations for all your retirement accounts, life insurance set up. Also, you're titling on accounts, whether it's switching it to joint tenancy with right of survivorship with a spouse, TOD, POD. Again, we can go down those rabbit holes, but just really be thoughtful about how your accounts are titled, who's going to receive them, but most importantly, who is going to be the one in charge, not just when you die, but when you're alive and possibly incapacitated in the future.
Yeah, and it's important to reevaluate your beneficiaries on life insurance and all your accounts every year because your family circumstances will change. And we had a catastrophic case with Jenny Roselle. And as an aside, I'll say that if you didn't get to attend the Bogleheads Conference, they put up all the videos on their website in a few months. So you can be an attendee and watch all these great talks. But anyway, Jenny Roselle mentioned a catastrophic consequence where a husband actually left everything to his ex-wife and forgot, maybe he wanted that, but people didn't really know, and he bypassed his kids and maybe his current wife. And people don't know if that's really what you wanted. So they had to settle that case, and it was a nightmare for everybody that was an immediate dependent.
Yeah, just to really think about crossroads. Like sometimes people just say, look at it every few years, but crossroads, anytime there's a birth, a death, a marriage, a divorce, or a change in relationship. So saying, hey, again, we have maybe tension in our family that might change the way I view about how I want my money inherited. Also, charitable giving can be a part of that. So don't just think about people who get your stuff, but the charities that you care about could also be in those documents.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to talk about here, and we're going to have Jenny Roselle or somebody come on and talk to us about kind of 10 big mistakes you can make and the things you got to watch out for with estate planning. We haven't done that yet, but stay tuned. We'll get to it. There's a lot to do on catching up to FI.
Yeah, we'll get to it. And don't forget, I want to shout, I know this is important to you, Bill, and Cody, I don't know if you have pets, but a lot of times people forget about provisions for their pets. So my daughter, she's a dog mom, and she has 2 beautiful golden retrievers. That, as a young adult, is something that would be hugely important to her to make sure that she probably wouldn't leave them to me because I don't think she trusts me with them, but she'll leave them to the right person.
And last thing on estate planning I want to mention is a lot of people, they naturally put their oldest son or daughter as their power of attorney, but it actually might make sense to actually have your children who live closest to you. So let's say that your oldest daughter lives overseas, right? And then the daughter below that lives 20 minutes away. It might make sense for the agent, especially for medical reasons, to actually be, again, I'm not an estate attorney giving you advice here, but just be very thoughtful about who you choose to not just get what, but to do what.
Yeah, exactly. And these are the kinds of things that we heard about from Jenny Roselle. And there's a lot more to talk about there, but we'll get to it, right? The next one, Cody, is that people don't take advantage of employee benefits. And that includes HSA, FSA, the group legal plan, and group insurance options. What should they watch out for as a, say, a W-2 employee that has a lot more benefits that factor into their enumeration package?
Yeah, that's actually a perfect transition out of estate planning because people are saying, well, how do I draft these documents? One of the options for drafting documents is through a group legal plan. So one example of, there are 2 things you need to look at. You need to look at your pay statement alongside your employee benefit handbook. You need to say, okay, look through the handbook to say, hey, what benefits am I provided? I think a lot of employees, they don't realize the breadth of their compensation going beyond their salary. Your employer pays for a lot of things that may not show up on your pay statement. So including, of course, employer provided health insurance. That's a big thing. Maybe disability, short-term and long-term. Maybe realizing if there are some limitations on the definitions within your disability insurance. That's a big one in certain professions. But the HSA, the FSA, that's the health savings account, and the flexible spending account. You notice that I said the second word, put emphasis, health savings. So saving and investing, and flexible spending, meaning you have to spend within a year typically. So the group legal plan is typically, if voluntary, you might spend only $100 or $200 to be able to draft all your estate documents. Whereas maybe going to a third party might cost double or even thousands of dollars to draft those documents. Also, again, as I mentioned, the life insurance, a lot of people don't realize that they might say, oh, I have life insurance through work. But when you look in the employee benefits, usually life insurance through a group plan through your employer is limited to a multiple of your salary. Well, sometimes only $50,000. That's actually the maximum the employer can deduct. So sometimes it's just $50,000 for a death benefit. Other times it's 1, 2, 3 times salary. So just keep in mind, just because you have life insurance through your employer doesn't mean it's the right amount for you and your situation and your future dependents if you were to predecease them.
And that's a perfect segue into the next one. And I recommend term life insurance, level term life insurance. But I fell for this trap when I had a Northwest Mutual, and I will out them here, the representative come to med school and sell me on whole life insurance. Why is that a problem, Cody?
Yeah, I mean, the phrase I use is don't let the product lead the plan. I find that, again, All these products can be useful. Permanent life insurance can be useful. Sometimes when you've gotten hurt by a previous experience, you kind of think this idea of like all annuities are bad, all life insurance is bad, permanent life insurance is bad. There are a few use cases, special needs, kind of key man, key woman life insurance for business owners, a lack of liquidity in your estate. If you want beneficiaries to receive a certain amount upon death, no matter what. But again, usually permanent life insurance, I say that it's sold way more often than it's purchased. Just keep in mind that if somebody's first recommendation to you is to buy permanent life insurance to solve, again, they call it, if you have a hammer, everything else looks like a nail, right? I just find that usually when people learn about permanent life insurance, it's from somebody who works at one of those companies, Ending and Mutual. Again, these aren't bad people. These aren't bad companies necessarily, but they are incentivized to sell you what pays them the highest commission, which term life insurance is usually the most appropriate for a transfer of risk for a limited amount of time. Most people don't need life insurance once they're financially independent in retirement. Just keep in mind that if you learn about term life insurance or permanent life insurance, just understand who is telling you about it. I always say typically permanent life insurance is like going to a Ford dealership and saying, hey, what kind of car do you think I should buy? They're going to say, oh, I recommend a Ford and the most expensive one on the lot. Whereas if you go to maybe your local mechanic and say, hey, what car do you recommend I buy? He'll say, oh, I've actually seen all different types of cars come in here based on how they work and the type of driver you are. This is what I recommend. So if you are going to get life insurance recommendations, make sure you're receiving them from somebody who isn't directly compensated for buying that product.
Yeah, and with regards to that, one way you can think of it is you got to, at the beginning of your career, you got to insure for your human capital and all things considered. And as your net worth increases, you could reduce that. So on the front end, you could ladder policies and have a 30-year, a 20-year, and a 10-year, and they'll fall away as you get older because your net worth, hopefully, as you're saving first, is growing, right?
And to add to that, I think a good sign for a policy in your best interest is one where you aren't penalized if you stop paying for it. So if you have a term life insurance policy and you say, I don't need insurance anymore, you can stop paying for it and there's no consequence of that. Whereas some of these policies, if you choose to start the policy and you stop paying it, you can get some massive penalties and fees tied along with that decision because the commission is typically paid out over the first, let's say, 10 years of the policy.
Yeah, I'm so glad I opened my eyes about this like 5 years ago before I retired, because at this point, I have no life insurance because I don't have a reason to. I've got my assets built up. I don't have anyone depending on my paycheck. So term life did what it was supposed to do. I think I had a 30-year term. It's expired and I don't feel like I need another one. So I like this one.
Well, one reason people can maintain term, however, is funeral costs. And you don't want your family to necessarily be stuck with them. So you can have a reduced policy just to make sure that they're not stuck with the cost of your funeral.
Right. You could set up whatever provisions you want. Like Cody, you mentioned with a bank account, like having a beneficiary for that. Anytime you're naming a beneficiary, then the money goes to them directly outside of probate, and it's usually pretty quick, correct? So there's ways to do it even without insurance, but insurance is another way to help with liquidity, right?
Yeah, and term life insurance is considered the purest form of risk transfer. It's the cheapest cost for the greatest benefit, which is what most people need.
Yeah. Okay, Bill, what we got next on here?
Oh my goodness, this is a good one. And I may be guilty a little bit of this.
I didn't want to say it. I just wanted you to read that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm older. I'm 59. I want to retire in the next 4 years. So I have to sort of edge towards more conservatism. I mean, I still am 75% stock, right? So I'm not overly conservative. I'm not Jackie, who's got a lot more risk tolerance, but people invest too conservatively while working and too aggressively moving into retirement. So Cody, talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think that while working, maybe you get in this mindset of prioritizing income. The thing is, I always say kind of prioritize income from your employer, or maybe you're self-employed while you're working, and don't prioritize income from your investments because you don't need the income. So what I find is it's usually a risk tolerance thing in terms of like, I'm kind of scared about the market. Maybe I always say the gap between your risk tolerance, which is how you feel about risk, and your risk capacity, your ability or need to take risk. The gap between those two is typically just education. So I just find that as people become more educated, they actually feel more comfortable taking risk, assuming that they give every dollar a job and a use by date. What I mean by conservatively by working, and then the flip side, being too aggressive moving into retirement, it's the idea of catching up to FI. I think sometimes we assume the only way I can catch up is by taking risk and like go big or go broke, go big or go home, right? So I find that, again, giving every dollar a use by date, I constantly ask myself and ask others saying, how much money do you plan to take out of your portfolio over the next 7 years? I think that's a pretty decent rule of thumb for how much of your portfolio could be allocated toward fixed income or bonds. So most people who are working, let's say you're working and you plan to work another 10 years. If I ask that question, you can ask yourself, how much money do I plan to take out of my investments over the next 7 years? If you're not going to retire for another 10 years, you're like, well, none. Again, potentially you have your risk tolerance to add to this, but potentially you might have the capacity to be 100% stock based on things that may or may not occur in the future. But with somebody who's going to retire in 3 years, I'll say, how much do you plan to take out of your portfolio in the next 7 years? They're like, well, about 4 years worth, right? I'm going to work another 3 years and then start taking down the next 4. So I might say, okay, well, let's figure out how much money might you take out of your portfolio in the next 7 years? Let's say 4%. Times 4, 16. Maybe it makes sense to have an 85-15 total allocation. So that's just one rule of thumb to potentially use. But I just find the aggression actually comes from feeling like you're behind. And the only way to potentially catch up is to invest more aggressively. With that said, just like I said with the 7 years, just because you're retiring doesn't mean that all your money should be invested conservatively. So you mentioned kind of that 70-30 portfolio. From what I've seen is actually fairly appropriate for a lot of people retiring because they're only planning to spend about 30% of their portfolio over the next 7 to 10 years. The rest of it has a long-term time horizon.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm right in line with that, Jackie.
Yeah,
so,
you are. But that does come up in our group all the time, and it comes up with late starters all the time. So I'm so glad that you spoke to that in your list here.
All right, Jackie, what comes up next? We got to try and get through more of these. And if we don't get through them all, folks, then we'll list them on our site and in the show notes so that you can digest it on your own.
Yeah, we'll definitely have the complete list in the show notes. We're just hitting a few that we know applies to our late starters, and people told us that this was some of their mistakes. So for this one, I don't hear this one a lot, but it does warrant some emphasis. So they don't analyze their specific tax lots when selling taxable brokerage investments or take advantage of tax gain or tax loss harvesting. And the part I wanted to emphasize was the fact that these are regular brokerage accounts. These are not retirement accounts, not 401ks, not IRA. Brokerage accounts can be very powerful, and sometimes people are not taking full advantage of them.
Yeah, what I find in investing is I try to get the 90% right. Earn income, save, invest, give, like get the big rocks, get the boulders and the rocks done. But there is a form of optimization. I love tax planning. Nearly every movement of money involves a tax consequence or specific exclusion. So I'm always looking for ways to optimize for taxes. One example there. So Bill, you mentioned giving to charity, right? So if you're going to give to, let's say, the Red Cross, for example, and you want to give appreciated stock, what I would want to do, and this is a perfect example, is when I go into my investment account, let's say that I've been buying the total stock market index fund for the last 20 years. And over that time, every time I've put money in, every time a dividend's paid out and been auto reinvested, hopefully you're doing some auto reinvestment in some of your accounts too. Every time you buy more shares, if you look at your custodian, Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, you're going to see what's called a new tax lot, which effectively is kind of like every time you purchase creates a new mark for your cost basis, how much you purchased it for, and how many shares, and what's the current market value of those shares. But over time, you might actually have dozens and dozens of potential tax lots. But what happens when it comes to selling or giving those shares to charity, what happens is they typically go with just whatever the default is in Fidelity, Schwab, or Vanguard. And they call these disposal methods, by the way. I looked at Fidelity. They actually have 11 different disposal methods that you could choose from, which is just overwhelming. I just say sometimes it's first in, first out, which means that whatever the first lot you purchase will be the first one you sell, or last in, first out, which is the last one you purchase will be the first one you sell or give to charity. So I actually use this disposal method called specific identification, which is SPEC ID, which is anytime I sell any investment or give any investment, I designate the exact tax lot that I want to sell or give. And one example of that might be I help somebody actually gift shares to their adult children who are in lower tax brackets than them rather than giving cash. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that when we gave the stock to the child, we didn't want to give anything at a loss. If you have any securities at a loss, you typically, again, not advice for your personal situation, but you typically want to sell investments at a loss and then give that cash because you actually potentially get to deduct that loss against other gain and potentially $3,000 against other income, a tax strategy. In this moment, I identified specific lots that had unrealized capital gain that she could give directly to her daughter. And by giving specific lots rather than just giving like an average, you're doing average disposal of those shares, I was able to actually calculate the dollar amount that her child would owe in taxes whenever she consequently sold those shares. So again, this is a little bit more in like the 5 to 10% of optimization in your plan, but just be very thoughtful about like which shares you sell and which shares you give to charity.
So, Cody, it sounds like this would also be a good thing to apply if someone has like an employee stock purchase program and they have a lot of employee stock they have purchased like over years or even decades. Go back and look at those tax lots before you decide when you decide to sell.
Yeah, I like the advice for the spec ID. Be intentional. Pick what it makes the most sense. Take your losses against other gains and give those appreciated shares to charity or your kid as a charity who will pay a lower marginal rate of taxes on what you give them as opposed to cash. Or donate them to a donor advised fund and take the deduction yourself.
And a nice rule of thumb here is that when you're giving to charity, you're typically going to want to give the lots with the highest unrealized gain as a percentage. So you divide the unrealized gain loss into how much it's worth. So you typically give the highest percentage of that calculation to charity. And when you're selling, you typically want to sell things that have been held more than a year, but with the lowest tax liability as a percentage. So again, there's more information about this in the Measure Twice Money course if you're interested. Maybe a little sales pitch there. But yeah, I just love these tax optimized strategies, especially for people who are very careful about how much they're paying in taxes.
Okay, Jackie, we got a few more to go through. Pick which one you want to talk about.
Well, I think we've all been guilty of this, probably doesn't warrant a lot of discussion, but they invest in expensive, actively managed mutual funds rather than index funds based on recent short-term performance rather than long-term risk return metrics. What you got on that one, Cody?
Yeah, so I'm finding this in two different ways. One is when you're looking at your 401k fund options. I think this is very unfortunate for kind of a lack of education. Whenever you're provided the funds in your 401k, sometimes it doesn't even say how much they cost, but typically they'll only show you recent performance. They'll say how well that fund did over the last, year to date, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. And what happens is you're incentivized sometimes to just choose what's done the best in the past. And unfortunately, history has told us it's kind of the opposite. The things that have done really well in the past don't necessarily do the best moving forward. So that's one of them. Also, anytime you see something like maybe a new investment that was just added to your 401k, it's this new shiny thing that's done really well in the past. The problem is typically, again, things that have done recently in the past, this recency bias. Sometimes the things that have done well recently are added to your fund lineup and you feel like, oh, you should go ahead and buy these because they've done well recently, assuming that how they've done in the last year or two are going to be how they do in the next 20, 30 years that I'm investing possibly in this account.
Yeah, shout out to NVIDIA. It might be at its peak, right?
Right.
All right, let's try and move on a little bit because there's so many good ones. We'll go lightning on these. They forget to automatically reinvest their dividends, resulting in too much cash building up on the sidelines, which often sits in that XX money market fund.
Yeah, so anytime you receive dividends, capital gain distributions from mutual funds, ETFs, my personal bias is to always auto reinvest. Because some people say, well, what if I need that money to pay income in retirement? I personally take what I call a total return approach, which is when I need money for my portfolio, I sell as needed to get that money. So just like we talked about with your tax lots. So if I auto reinvest, when I do need to sell those lots in the future to gain access to income to distribute in retirement, I can simply choose which tax lots have the lowest tax consequence. So rather than going into your account regularly, maybe weekly, monthly, quarterly, to manually put that money back to work, I'd rather auto reinvest my investments. So I only have to look at them maybe once or twice a year.
And this is really important because it's not done automatically. You have to go into your custodian and look at the dividends tab, and you have to click the button auto reinvest.
So here's one that I think would be very important for our late starters. So it's actually number 18 on the list, but it says they forget about Social Security when calculating their retirement distribution needs.
Yeah, so this idea comes from the idea of the 4% rule. Bill Bengen, I know he was also at the Bogleheads Conference.
He's awesome. It was an honor to meet him, and he agreed to be on the show.
Yeah, so we'll be bringing him to you soon.
Yeah, I cannot wait. That's going to be so fun. With that said, I think, again, there's amazing research that was done about this 4% rule. But I think the idea that it's called a 4% rule, I think it's not really a rule. It's more of a guideline to just generally follow directionally. But I think what happens is a lot of people say, I need to be able to support myself in retirement only based on my portfolio. I'm going to multiply my expenses or my gross distribution needs by 25 times. And then if I have that much money, I can retire. But what happens is they actually end up retiring with more money than they actually need because they forget about this thing called Social Security, which will replace not just a portion, but I've actually found that most retirees I work with in financial planning, their Social Security, especially if they're married with a spouse, their combined Social Security covers all of their essential spending. So their portfolio can be used all discretionary or non-essential, their extra travel, their needs are covered by Social Security, and then their wants and aspirations and their charitable gifts are covered by the portfolio. So I know that, again, politically, legislatively, there's been a lot of fear around Social Security going away, but please at least try out a strategy in your financial planning software, your spreadsheets, for including Social Security. Even if you don't think it will be there for you, just go ahead and run a scenario to see what would it look like if I did receive 100%, 75%, 50%, or 25% even of my Social Security, because my personal bias is that it's not fully going to go away. So I just think it's a big miss if you assume you're not getting any Social Security and you end up retiring years longer than you had to.
Yeah, and we did an episode with Social Security expert Mike Piper. I don't remember the episode number, but look back, search in our list, and people have said this is one of the more comprehensive Social Security episodes. And we may be doing another because it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guilty of that because when I was putting together my fire number and all of that, I did not include Social Security at all, but it turns out it's a powerful backstop once I actually did my research. So, Bill, what you want to hit next?
Well, I think we can get to a few more here. We may go a little over, but it's so important. Investors buy the wrong bonds for the wrong reasons, focused here on growth and income rather than stability and diversification. I am not guilty of this, but how does that work? Describe the difference between those two for us, Cody.
Yeah, so I think ultimately I do have the take, kind of like Frank Vasquez, about that bonds can provide one or more of the following: stability, income, and diversification. And my personal bias, I only buy bonds for stability. I kind of have a barbell approach to saying, hey, if I'm going to take risk, I'm going to take it with equity. If I'm going to focus on stability, I'm going to use bonds. But it really matters what types of bonds you use. There's a lot of information out there in terms of bonds from a lot of great people out there. But ultimately, what I'm finding is that we get really caught up in yield, especially more recently in 2023, 2024, there's been this focus on these high yield savings, and my money market funds, they're paying 4%. And they're like, there's these high yield bonds over here. I can get paid 9% on my high yield bonds. Like, why don't I just put my whole portfolio into that? And what I found in 2022, there's a silver lining in what happened in 2022 when bonds and stocks went in the same direction, which reminded people that there are different types of bonds, that people thought that all stocks are risky and all bonds are safe. There are so many types of bonds. So just in your own education, just learn about duration, learn about maturity, learn about credit risk, understanding there's a big difference between investing in high yield corporate bonds than there are investing in treasury bonds. So again, without going too deep there, just typically when you want stability, you're going for short duration and high credit, or even what's considered quote unquote risk-free from a credit perspective of buying. So I typically only buy short-term treasuries for stability and don't buy corporate bonds. And certainly I'm not a big fan of buying the high yield corporate bonds, which are still positively correlated to the stock market when things go sideways.
Yeah, treasuries are the least correlated to the stock market. And I actually do diversify between intermediate treasuries and short-term treasuries, but they call high yield bonds junk bonds for a reason.
Yeah.
And corporate bonds have more stock market risk. And why should you take that kind of risk in your bonds? I completely agree, Cody. Jackie, what's next?
Yeah, this one comes up so much. We have to mention it. It's actually number 20 on the list. But every time there's like a video about somebody retiring early, you always get the comments, well, what about health insurance? So number 20 talks a little bit about people assuming that health insurance coverage is expensive in early retirement based on their assets, when it may be cheap, even if it's fully subsidized based on their income. So this is anybody that's pre-65, pre-Medicare age. So this could definitely impact our community. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think what's happening is people are getting ready for retirement. Let's say they've done really well with their portfolio. They're like, wow, I have $1 million saved in my portfolio. But what they assume is they say, well, I'm wealthy, relatively, right? And there's no way I'm going to get a discount on my health insurance. I have way too much money. I've got this big portfolio. But again, some people call this maybe immoral to do, but I just play within the system that we're all given. But one example of this is, first of all, if you're buying a health insurance through the health insurance marketplace, some people call ACA, Obamacare. What happens there is you've got your list. It's based on household size, where you live, all those things to buy your plan. But there's something called a premium tax credit, which are your health subsidies that are typically advanced subsidies, which means that they're paid directly from the government to your health provider. You don't have to pay that subsidy out of your own pocket. But with that said, how much you pay for health insurance through the health insurance marketplace is not based on how much money you have. It's based on how much income you have, specifically modified adjusted gross income, which to simplify, it's really like your gross income plus your municipal bond interest. So I want to share one example here that I recently helped somebody. I won't won't share, of course, their confidential information here, but I recently helped somebody. They retired with over $2 million in their portfolio. They had 3 kids about to start college. We were able to get, even though they had $2 million in the bank and plenty of money to pay for health insurance in college, they got fully subsidized health insurance for the whole family, and they got free college tuition for all 3 kids. Some people might say that that's not fair, but again, working within the system that we're given, just know that most subsidies, government subsidies, are based on income, not assets. So assuming you have control and you can control your sources, again, we talked about Roth earlier, if you can take some money from Roth, take some money from pre-tax, take some money out of taxable brokerage, if you have the balance of tax location, you might be able to actually control your income sources and receive way cheaper healthcare than you did while working even.
Yeah, for U.S. people, that health insurance piece is huge. So I just wanted you to speak to that. And I did learn all about the fact that the healthcare premiums is based on the ACA, is based only on your income. And if somebody is not comfortable with that, then they shouldn't do it. But no need to put judgment on someone else. But it is how our system is set up. Those are the rules, and you're following the rules. So yeah. So Bill, what you got next? What's your hot one?
Oh, gosh. We did an episode on health savings accounts that's out this week. So I would refer people back to that because Cody sees that as a big deal because people spend it every year as opposed to investing it for long-term tax-free growth. What else do we got here? My goodness. Well, let's go to insurance a little bit. And homeowners, Cody says, they mismanage their homeowners and auto insurance. And how do they do that?
Yeah. So what I find from homeowners auto insurance is that they have too low of coverage and too low of deductibles. What I mean by that is, again, the liability is usually the lowest, right? So they might have auto insurance and they only have $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident. And you look at their taxable brokerage account and they've got $500,000, $750,000 sitting there just available for somebody to take advantage of that. And not just take advantage, but if there is a lawsuit, like that could be up for risk. Again, typically the $25,000, $50,000 doesn't go very far in terms of liability if you're in a severe accident. So what I'm finding is that most listeners here, assuming that you do have an emergency fund, let's say that you do have 3 to 6 month emergency fund, or you have maybe even tens of thousands of dollars you could get to quickly. I find that the deductibles for auto and homeowners are way too low. I've even worked with people who they got $1 million in the bank and their deductible for their car insurance is $250. So I just say, hey, again, that insurance is a transfer of risk for things that are of low frequency but high financial severity. So kind of ironically, I want to make sure that that high financial severity actually exists, which is actually a high deductible or a high out of pocket for people who can't afford it. If you can't afford a high deductible, maybe you keep it lower. But once you have that emergency fund, you have some stability in that slush fund in place, it might make sense to increase your deductibles, which by the way, if you can increase your deductibles, you might actually be able to increase your liability coverage with almost like a wash in terms of premiums. So I found that their premiums don't even really change that much by increasing their deductibles and increasing their liability, including maybe adding an umbrella insurance policy liability on top of that.
I was going to say that. You got to be able to crash into a Maserati and cover the cost of a Maserati. You got to, unfortunately, if you kill somebody, you got to cover for that. And in my case, I have a $3 million umbrella policy. And that to me is the one that almost always gets forgotten.
Yeah, I finally just got my first umbrella policy. It's for $1 million, but I learned about that too. But I know for a lot of people, this is a great area for opportunity. Now, we did skip around a little bit because there were so many good ones here and we wanted to hit the ones that we felt like would touch our community the most. But I definitely want to end with this last one. It's number 24 on the list. And it says they invest in their financial health, but neglect their physical, mental, spiritual, and relational wellness along the way.
Yeah, so I find when focusing on finances, that's what happens. We get really focused on the finances. If you think about kind of cooking on a stovetop, like you've got, again, all those areas of wellness. You've got your physical, mental, spiritual, relational, and financial wellness are all these pots that you're cooking on the stovetop. What happens, especially when you're catching up to FI, is that you get focused only on the finances. You say, hold on, I really need to focus on the finances right now, so I'm going to let everything else just boil in its pot. And I'm not really going to focus on my physical health, my mental health. I'm not going to really focus on my relationships and my spiritual practices. I'll get to all those things whenever I get my finances in place. But what I find happens is that you focus on the finances, you end up having enough money to retire, you get to the finish line financially, you have all the money in the world to do all the things you said you wanted to do, but you turn around and your physical health is no longer in place. You said, I have all this money to travel to Europe, and now I don't have the physical health to go all those steps that I wanted to take. Also, you said, hey, I wanted to travel the world with all my friends. Guess what? You really neglected your relationships because you're so focused on making more money and investing more. So physical, relational, mental, this is the biggest one. You get so focused on the money that you start introducing all these forms of anxiety to your life. It also, again, your financial anxiety touches every other part of your life. It touches your family. It touches your friends, your relationships. So just know that if you're not taking care of yourself physically, mentally, that's easily not only going to affect your relationships, your spiritual practices, but ironically, it's going to change your financial outlook too. Because guess what becomes really expensive when you have low physical and mental health? Your medical expenses. So you could actually have less of your money going to those adventures that you want to have in retirement, going toward your physical and mental health. Just make sure that nothing's on the back burner for too long on the path to retirement when you're catching up to FI.
Yeah, while I was coming home from Bogleheads, my wife and I met a couple in their 80s who travel the country judging barbecue contests. They've been to 41 states. They just got back from Fargo. And in your slow-go or no-go years, you may not be able to do this. You got to focus on quality of life longevity, not just actuarial longevity. You want to close that gap between the quality of your life and your demise. You don't want to have a glide path that is really long to your death, that is dysfunctional. You can't just sit on the couch and watch Netflix for 10 years in your retirement. You want to maximize the quality of your life. And we did do a show on this with Dr. Bobby. It's a really great show. Search it in the podcast and go back and listen to him because he focuses on all the aspects of this. And it's really important. Fritz Gilbert focuses on this as well in the transition to your retirement. And I'm guilty of this too because I have my fitness a little bit boiling without really maximizing it. Being overweight is a problem, right? So I admit that I am a little guilty of this myself.
And I'll raise my hand too.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, all of us. Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm going to therapy next week. Here we go, right? The last thing I want to mention here, it's actually on YouTube. There's a financial planning client I met with. Her name is Cheryl. Cheryl and John is on the YouTube channel. And she made this really interesting comment that when you get older, you don't want the list of people who have died to be longer than the list of people that you're friends with. And I think that's really powerful to think about. Is there a way that by the time I get to my last days that I can say that my list of living friends is longer than my list of friends who have passed away before me?
I've never heard that. And that is a great tagline for how to live your life. You're never done. Remain curious. Jonathan Clemens says he wants to remain a part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just think even now, me in my 30s, like how can I develop relationships with the younger generations, not just my generation?
Exactly. I mean, it keeps you young. I agree. Totally. That's why I go to economy.
Yeah.
With all the hipsters.
Well, that one in particular was such a big deal. I'm guilty of a lot of those. And it's a great reminder and a reminder to all of our listeners to take care of all those other aspects of your life. So Cody, we absolutely love this list. That's why we brought you on. And your contribution to the FI community is tremendous and it's impactful. As a CFP and a financial planner and professional, you are doing things to set up financial planning in the future in a whole different way. And it really, really matters. So thank you for that. Bill, you want to close us out here because this was truly amazing.
Yeah, I would encourage people to go and look at the sponsors and affiliates we have on our website. Cody's there, as are others that we wholeheartedly recommend. So you're not done with just the podcast. Go to the Facebook community, go to the website, and you'll find that the resources here are much more robust. Use the show notes. They're there for a reason. Okay, Cody, any final thoughts for late starters?
I know that we covered a lot of them. I think in terms of late starters, I'll end with my trademark, keep finance personal, that your financial plan should look different from everybody else's around you. And I know it feels scary to feel like you can't just follow rules of thumb, but as I mentioned, one size fits all hardly fits anyone. Has anybody ever received a free t-shirt when they shoot the t-shirts into the stadium seats? It's always like this, the one size fits all is usually too big, right? So I just say, yeah, just as you're learning, learn as much information as you can, but then say, how much of this actually applies to my circumstance? A lot of the things that you're learning about might actually be optimized for different people, not for you. Just as you're learning, just stay curious, but also be thoughtful about, hey, does this information actually apply to my life? And if it doesn't, that's okay. And I'm not missing out on something.
Well, I'll actually make a plug for financial advisors here, appropriate financial advisors. And your episode with us in the past went through this, but one of the lectures actually, or the talks at Bogleheads was when to stop DIYing. That was Carolyn McClanahan. So look at that video when the Bogleheads videos come out, and there are a lot of reasons to stop DIYing, get advice. And one of them is mental decline. When do we stop being able to DIY? And that's the big one. Anyway, don't want to end on a downer note. note, I'm going to turn to Jackie to close us out today.
Yeah, like I said, an amazing show. The entire list will be in the show notes. There's 24 of them, probably a lot more, but you distilled them out. Very, very good, Cody. We thank you so much for all of your advice. Thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll catch you next time on Catching Up to FI.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, we'll have you back. All right, bye, guys. We look forward to hearing from you and seeing you again.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. Our social media maven is Diana Falk, and our editor is Fritz Brizard. We love them, and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofi.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services, because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to FI. Cheers.